There's so much dust in my workshop. It's starting to drive me bonkers, but everything I do generates more dust, and I thought I'd have it cleaned up by now, but I don't. It's so annoying. But that's okay. Welcome to the workshop. My name is John Decker. Today we are going to be doing more French cleats. If you haven't seen any of the videos leading up to this point, just know that I'm not making videos just for the fun of making videos. I'm making videos because I actually need to get these projects done. And one of the projects I had to get done was cleaning up the workshop. And one of the ways I decided to do that was by reorganizing everything, which, to be fair, really did need to be done. Things were in like boxes in the corners and under the workbench and all sorts of crazy places. And I have accumulated a lot of garbage, to be honest. Some of which is very useful garbage, but garbage nonetheless. One of the things that I am really focusing on for today is how do I combine some projects into one video. So I'm going to try my best to make this a shorter video than each individual video put together would have otherwise been. I've never really been a fun on-camera personality. I am a goofy person in real life, but it's, you know, I'm getting there. So I'll try a little bit to show you guys some of who I am for real. So let's talk about what we're getting up on the wall today. Now, first off, if you haven't seen them before, that's a French cleat. As an example, this is a French cleat. All it really is something to mount your tools in some sort of holder with a 33/4 plywood and a 45-degree angle piece stuck on the back. And it matches up with ones that are on the wall. They're basically straps. And so you can mount these wherever you want. And you're probably like, but why not pegboards? They do the same thing. These just look interesting. And to be fair, are a little bit more robust. That could hold somewhere around 500 pounds before the French cleat itself started to tear apart. I know, I've watched other people's videos. I don't know, maybe I'll link them in the description. But anyhow, I don't need to do the science other people have. What's on today's wall project? Well, I've got this reciprocating saw. Is this reciprocating saw? I think this is a reciprocating saw. I'll be fair, I am not in the trades. This is gonna be a thing where I say the wrong words occasionally. I'm just a guy with some tools. This is the P516 saw by Ryobi. Very good, little robust saw, 18 volt. Only occasionally will you need more power than this if you're cutting through wood. This is great for trimming trees, by the way. Just get a really long, tree trimming blade, pruning blade. I use this, by the way, for pulling out stumps when we first moved here. A neighbor down the road was like, hey, John, if you stick your saw blade in there and you clean out a little bit here and there and you just grab your reciprocating saw and cut all the roots, you can pop that thing right out of the ground. I wasn't bringing in a grinder, probably due to the cost. It was during the pandemic. As a replacement for that, I got later on when doing some actual deconstruction of parts of the house, I got this. This is a same kind of saw by competitor brand Flex. This is the FX2271. I'm very happy with this saw. I basically use this one almost exclusively now for actual construction or destruction, and I end up using the Ryobi, like I said, for pruning. So, with that in mind, both these have to go on the wall in some form or fashion. Next up on the list for today is this little guy, which is actually, I'm swinging it around like, I don't know, whatever. Anyways, this is the Ryobi angle grinder, and if you can't tell by looking at it, it has gone through a life. I have used this thing so much. And, it's got a lot going on. It's a normal angle grinder. There is no complaint that I can make about this except for one thing about the form factor. And that is when you're using it, there's a battery, you might have a bigger battery normally. When you're using it, if you want to use an angle grinder for doing polishing, say you're going to polish cement. I don't know why you would want to polish cement. I have wanted to polish cement. I have actually used these to polish cement, but you say you're using it for polishing or buffing or whatever you're using it for. The plane of the battery and the plane of, I guess this is called a nut, they are at the wrong plane as, reference-wise. You can't actually grind anything flat with this, say this way, without hitting the battery first. So you end up doing weird angles and stuff, and it's just not good. So with that in mind, as a replacement, because I did in fact need to do flat polishing, I have a second angle grinder, which is this one. This was made by Metabo. Again, you can see it's gotten some work in, and I think the last time I used it, I must have been grinding some brick. This works great. It's got a flat plane, and there's nothing impeding that, so you can use it for making flat surfaces and polishing, and I highly recommend. This tool is very, very powerful. So if you got weak hands, don't buy it. The only thing that I have as a complaint for this particular tool is that unlike Ryobi's unit, if you spin off the handle on these, there's nowhere vertically to put the handle. And so you're not going to be able to use it as I don't know, it's just not designed the same. So there are always going to be little things about every tool that make it a little bit different, a little bit better. And you're probably looking at that and going, John, neither one of your angle grinders have their knuckle guard on them. No, they don't. I don't know where it is. I'll find it somewhere. It's in the workbench, I'm sure, but I have no idea where it is. So clearly I do not use it. All right, so those 4 have to go up on the wall today. Let's go ahead and switch over to the camera angle that shows you the workbench, and let's see what we can come up with today. The truth is that I had considered just mounting them like I have the others with a handle through the handle here, basically holding them up like that. But the more I look at it, that's quite a lot of room to use up on the wall. Let's assume the table was the wall as this example goes on. So I think what I'm going to do instead of that is a design that is essentially just a box for them to be housed in, kind of like a holster on the wall. And the reason for that is because there are times in which I may leave the battery on, and there are times where I leave the blade in place, and the blades change. This is the shortest blade I have. They're usually about that long. And the Ryobi blade, which I took off for the season, is actually more like 8 to 12 inches long for pruning. And so with that in context, I think what I'm going to end up doing is something more akin to a holster. So I'm going to draw it up here, and then I'll show you the idea. And we may end up having to do this as a time lapse for saving time. This looks goofy, I know, but a French cleat is stronger if the weight, let's assume this is the backside of the cleat, if the weight from the mount is being pulled straight down at the kind of plane of the wall of the cleats themselves, and the more weight you put away from the cleat, like the further away you put it, especially if you're up higher than the cleat itself, the more it starts to tear free. So if you need to put something far away from the cleat, you can put it down really low, as long as the weight from whatever you're putting out there is putting it's basically underslinging that weight, and it's dragging down on this point rather than on this point over here. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're building cleats. And a cabinet is a good example of that. You need to have a really good strong cleat here, and make sure that your standoff from the wall is set up so that your weight is being pulled straight down rather than being pulled out and away. So that in mind, if I'm going to do a holster for this, I need to do something, like I have to keep in mind that torsion essentially. And so what I'm thinking is, since they're pretty narrow at the bottom, I'd taper it out away from the wall near the bottom, and that would be a plane or a board, we'll show from another angle in a second here, that they would be leaning against or laying against. And it would really only have to be as deep as this lower portion of the housing, because that's essentially the same on both of them, regardless of how much extra junk is going on or what the shape is for the battery housing further up. And then from that point, going up to the top of the board, just for extra stability, would draw all the way up to the end there. And this is representing the sidewall of the holster. So that's what I started doing. This is one of those circumstances where I didn't have the measurements. I had the rough idea. So I dug through my pile of scrap material and found something that might work. Decided not to go with plywood for the side walls because I've had some plywood split out in the past and really just wasn't worth it. I didn't have enough time to mess around with that. So this was 1 by, I think, or 3/4 inch, technically thick pine, and it might be pressure treated, but it had painted sides, which I think meant that it came from another project. I've kept a lot of these pieces along the way. And here I am just measuring off of the tools themselves to get that pitch for the front of the holster, and then the angle that scoops up all the way to the pitch at the very top there, essentially. And it wasn't exactly the way that I had it in my mind, but trying again to create something that would be usable over time and very strong. I built it kind of like you might a wall, and that means just putting cladding on the outside and then cutting what effectively is the inner wall here, or that front face that they're going to lean against, and running everything together with these J screws. And the bottom panel here was just a matter of sizing it up. I don't need to do special joinery with OSB, so I'm just driving it right into those, for lack of a better term, studs that are built into the box, and checking to see that everything was going to be right lining up and where those holes were going to be for the blades. Now, in this instance, I just used a drill with a paddle bit on it to cut those holes. I probably could have been more precise, but nobody's going to care except for me. Now, to be fair, I could have gotten a lot more precise with the cuts on the bottom instead of just using a drill bit to kind of core them out a little bit. But it doesn't matter that much, and I have to remind myself that nobody's looking at the bottom of the box to see how the blades are sticking out, except for you guys, because you got to see how it got built. Okay, so with that in mind, though, I'm going to set it on a blade, and it's going to pop up here. There we go. With that in mind, both of these reciprocating saws can fit in this. The only problem I had with it was when I was passing a screw through from the back, I caught the top of this piece and it split out a little bit. It shouldn't be a huge deal, but if it becomes a problem later on, I'll peel it off and, whatever. But for now, it is what it is. There we go. The harness or the holster is completed and ready to rock. And I'm going to go ahead and set this on here. That sits in pretty well. Of course, it's got the blade in there, so it's hard to do on the table. And this one sits in right next to it. And when they're on the wall, it looks like that. It's pretty neat. Okay, so the cleat worked for the reciprocating saws, and that's good. And I will show video at the end of all of the stuff up on the wall. And I'm grateful that the time lapse is only about 2 minutes long, because otherwise this video is going to get really long with me talking about everything so often. This next section is going to be the grinders, and I honestly have no idea where to start with this. So I'm going to try to talk through some of this, and I may have to cut it down and edit. So let's go through it. What are we going to do? On the Ryobi, because the Ryobi has the battery mount and it's a little lip here at the bottom, I think the best mechanism for hanging this one on the wall is going to be just to create a fork, a wooden fork like many of the other ones are, and make this just hang on the wall, kind of like one of the shovel hooks. And that'll be something that's simple, and then no matter what's on the blade and no matter which direction the handle is facing, it'll still work as a mount, and that will be the simplest answer for this. So that really is just a plank on the back, maybe a 7 or 8 inch plank with a cleat attached to it, and then the fork. That'll be the simplest way to do it. And you got to keep it simple. So that's that one. Now, over on the Metabo side, I don't have a good fork. And I think based on the fact that I don't always have the same grinder on here, and it's going to be different sizes and different shapes and things like that, I think what I'm going to do is use this piece of 3 inch. I'll just cut this in half and put a block, mount a block to it here that offsets it from the wall about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. And then have the backer plate there. And the backer plate will be about this high. So again, probably another 7 or 8 inch backer plate. So the mount has to be underslung. So these can both be answered kind of the same way, and you're just hanging a very small piece on the wall. Okay, so I think I'm just going to get started building that. And when I'm done with both builds, I'll show you how they worked on the wall. And the forks was simple enough. There happened to be some wood nearby to use for that. Sounded. And this was one of those circumstances where I was just grateful that I happened to have that material sitting literally in a bin behind me. Did a little bit of trimming there on it just to make sure that everything was nice and smooth. And here we were cutting down that 3 inch pipe and pulling together a little block. Now, this little trick I've done before is to use the belt sander to like round out a concave section on a piece of wood so that it'll match up with the PVC pipe in this instance. Now, I was doing a little bit of focusing here on trying to figure out how to attach the PVC pipe directly to that piece of wood without it looking janky. And I got a little fixated on making that all happen from one hole in the front. Probably could have been shorter if I just drilled 2 holes, but hey, you know what? You get into those grooves of trying to make it exactly what's in your head, and it takes a little bit longer. So this one, pretty simple. Again, a backer plate, I guess we're going to call it a cradle there at the front. And drilling everything together with GRKs means it's nice and strong. Got them all done in one day, which is nice as far as that goes. And here's the simplest to the most complex. Simplest, turns out, just behind me, I had 2 offcuts that I was planning on using for kindling, and they will work just fine. And for this, couldn't have asked for a perfecter part. That's not a word, don't use perfecter in language there, but I just cut at a 30-degree angle here. It's probably needs more than that, but it felt like a nice angle. 30-degree angle to make that slot in and out. And when a battery's on there, it's right flush in line with the top of the cleat. So that's one done. No idea how much I wish I had nice birch plywood for those backers, but not worth the expense for this. All right, next one up. little bit more complex, but you know, pretty simple premise. Again, 8-inch backer on the back with the cleat. This time I used the 3-inch PVC, and the only thing complex about this was having to shape this, I don't know, what do you want to call it, a yoke? I like that word. Cradle is probably a better word, that the PVC could set right into there. And now it's sitting there, and it's got 2 screws on the inside, which was only tricky because I just wanted 1 hole in the front for reasons I don't know, whatever. I fixated on it. Anyhow, it does work. It's a little awkward to get in with the wire on there, with the cord on there, but all in place, sits nice and flush and level. I don't know if I was able to keep this to 30 minutes in my cut, but I hope it was entertaining nonetheless. If you guys like seeing projects like this that are done not as fine woodworking, but just as like it's a thing. I have basic tools and basic materials and things that you can find in a scrap pile, because that's literally what they are. Let me know in the comments if you like this idea, if you are interested to see more, and I'll show you after I get these up on the wall what the next couple ones are going to be. And then we should be done pretty soon, because I only have a handful more of these power tools. Now, to be fair, some of what I'm about to show you probably doesn't need to be on the wall, but since I've used all of my cabinets for other things, they kind of have to be now. First up, and very clearly something that should be on the wall, I need to clean it up, but I have a Metabo framing nailer. This particular unit is NR90AE. Yep, that's it. I think I bought this for, I want to say $60. It was on crazy sale at Lowe's. This was 2-3 years ago now. But it has come in handy. It needs to be cleaned up because it's been sitting in all the sawdust. That needs to go up on the wall next. And then I've got the Flex reciprocating saw. No, sorry, oscillating saw, which again, I do like this saw, but I had to buy an adapter so that it could use all of the blades that I have, because their saws have a specialty clip thing that doesn't work with normal blades. So I don't use it as often just because it takes so much time to decouple and recouple the regular blades. And then this beauty, man, I've had this thing. Well, I think I've had this thing since before I was married. So going on, well, that's not good. I can't remember that. 17 years, going on 17 years or more that I've had this. I've not been married that long. No, I have been. Oh man, 15 years married? Yeah, well, 15 years this year. Anyways, okay, I've had this longer than that. And I've used it from everything from defrost in the freezer to making cosplay armor back in the day. So it's good to have a heat gun. If you don't have one, this is a good product. And it uses a lot of power though. Yeah, 1300 watt, 1350 roughly. Almost as much as a space heater just to run one of these things. For now though, this one's going on the wall, this one's going on the wall, and that one's going on the wall. This is a weird one. That'll be next time though. Thank you so much for joining me. My name again is John Decker. This has been the Barn to Workshop project here on the channel. And like and subscribe if you like this kind of content, and let me know down in the comments if you've seen anybody doing anything like these particular tools as French cleat mounts, so I can get some ideas on how to do them.